Hey, what's good guys? So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down one of my unreleased samples, and it's a very dark, ambient, atmospheric sample. And I'm going to play you the intro, but hold on after because this breaks down into a really cool textured atmospheric section, and I'm going to explain all the different VSTs, plugins, effects, textures that I've used and how I've used them. And yeah, nevertheless, let's get straight into it. This is the PD Sunset Dreams preset from Tom Wolf's Atlantis Bank in Diva, and this was what I played, and these are the chords that I played. So it's just such a lovely soft sounding pad, and it just gives you that kind of dusty ambient sound. And so I really like those chords, super simple. The next layer we have are these textures. So I don't have all the original source files here because I've time stretched all these textures and I can't just stretch them back to how they were, but basically I just reversed this and added some plugins, but this is what it sounds like with nothing. And all I did was chopped it, reversed them, and added the UAD Rev A compressor. You're going to see me use a lot of these UAD plugins. They've been my go-to compressors and EQs recently. I added even more of the same compressor. I added some delay to give it that kind of tail end, so without. And then with. And then some of the UAD Pultec EQ. It's really important when you use delays to use them sparingly. Sometimes when there's a lot of open space like this, it sounds great because there's space for things to tail off. Whereas if you have very busy sections, having a lot of reverb or a lot of delay can really muddy up your mix quick. So really pay attention to when it's actually worth using a delay and when to not use one. And this texture I'd also chopped. This is also from ANIMUS, and without any plugins it sounds like this. So I'd already time stretched this and chopped it a little bit. That's why it even sounds a little bit kind of distorted, and there's some artifacts there. I sound shifted it down one just so it matched the project. Added more of the UAD Rev A compressor. I added some multi-band compression, which I always like to speak about, but this is how you can really achieve great clean mixes, by ducking where other instruments or tracks are playing and boosting where others aren't. So that's what I did there. Boosted that high end to give it some shine, added some of the Pultec EQ again, and then just the Fab Filter EQ, just ducking some of the harsher frequencies so it sounds like this. You can see that big spike there. And then I just took this drum break, which initially I was using the full thing, and then I decided actually I liked it more as just a rhythmic texture. So just that ride cymbal and kick, it just gave it some rhythm, and I just sound shifted it. Then I added some halftime and just reduced the mix down here, as you can see. And as always, I love to use the DH flanger, especially on my drum sounds. It just gave it that width and that kind of swooshy effect. Then I added the emergence plugin, which just gave it this kind of delay. So this is without, and then with. So just gave it some tail and some texture. And speaking of, I just added more stock Logic delay. So it really rings on quite a bit. And then I use some EQ just to cut out the lows, especially because you hear it's a kick drum, and having delay on a kick drum is going to muddy up the low end quite quickly. So yeah, that just kind of cleaned it up. And the next layer is the synth bass, which is the Dean preset from Kavi's Confessions to Analog Lab Bank. And it sounds like this. This is the pattern. And initially I just added some of the FabFilter Saturn just for some compression, and then just some EQs, cutting out the highs, boosting kind of the frequency that I liked, and using the multi-band compressor just to tighten and compress that low end, and then ducking some of those muddier frequencies, boosting the sort of middle range, but I'm using the expand setting, so it's pushing it to the sides. Since there's a lot of the other stuff like the pads, the textures, they kind of live in this frequency range, so since they're more in the middle, I kind of tried to push the synth bass towards the side. Also keeping in mind that there's not much going on here because I'd EQ'd a lot of the highs out. And all I did was bounced out that synth bass pattern, added a little bit more of the multi-band compressor just to really compress and tighten that low end, and then added just a bit more FabFilter EQ just to cut out the lows that generally humans can't hear much below like 30 Hertz. Sometimes you'll just notice it makes a slight difference in the mix just to cut out those frequencies, so that's what I did. And then I just have this texture, which is a very ambient one, and without any plugins it sounds like this. So it's basically just a background texture, and I just sound shifted it, added some halftime, not with too much mix, and added some RC20 with quite a bit of noise, and then just added some pancake, which is just panning it slightly, added some of the Pultec EQ just to keep it in the high end, and then just EQ just as a little texture in the high end. So yeah, very subtle, but it's layers like this that can really add a lot of depth to your samples, especially if you're trying to make something ambient. I would definitely recommend doing something like that. Now, I also have this texture, which I think was just a chop that I'd taken, and without anything on, it sounds like this. So it was sort of an ARP texture, and I just sound shifted it so it matched the key of the project. I added some of the UAD AE compressor. I added the spectral gate plugin, which I've spoken about this one. So this is without the spectral gate. And then this is with. So it's just kind of shrinking the frequency range and making it more subtle. And then I added some of the Pultec EQ, just cutting out a lot of the lows here. Then I EQ'd, probably cutting out a lot of the lows and ducking where a lot of the other tracks are playing. And then just some more panning, just going left to right. So it sounds like this. So it's just a little subtle kind of swell or like build up just into the next section where the synth comes in. And then I also just have this ambient texture, which without any plugins sounds like this. All I did was just added some more compression. I added some RC20, just some noise, wobble, and just adjusting the width so that it sounded very close and mono sounding, and EQing out a lot of the lows here. And then also adding delay just because I wanted this to sound almost like a ball dropping, right? So again, just up to here, it sounds like this. So just a cool little background piece of ear candy. And then I've got some panning going on, so it's just kind of all over the place, and just some EQ, again cutting out the lows. And then I've just got this drum fill which came from the drum break, and I just put it in a separate track just to add a bit more texture to it. All I did was just added some more of the halftime to give more of that low end focus, and kept the DH flanger, the Pultec EQ, but just not cutting out as many lows because I wanted it to kind of be thumpy and like kind of sound thick sounding. And then just quite a bit of compression there, and it sounds like this. So I just love that. And now for this next section, there's only two new elements, which is the synth, which is kind of the main thing, and then the drum break, which I included the full thing, which sounds like this. just having those little pauses just helps create more of a vintage chopped feel, and it just adds more character and just makes the sample a bit more interesting. And I actually use this little alter boy just to shift the formant down a bit, which kind of makes it sound a bit more like lower pitch, but it's still the same pitch as it was. And this is a plugin that most producers would actually use on vocals, but I thought it sounded cool just to make the drums sound quite dark and grungy and low sounding. And yeah, just some EQ, cutting out the lows where especially that synth bass is sitting, and cutting out some of the highs, and just add some compression as well. And the synth preset was just this IW Jupiter synth brass from the Ingo Widener preset bank in Diva, and I've spoken about this one before. I've been using it a lot because it's such a versatile and just authentic sounding synth. What I did was added some of the AE compressor here, and I added quite a lot of reverb because I wanted it to sound very big sounding. Just EQing out the lows. Again, I always say that if you're going to use a lot of reverb, keep in mind that it's worth EQing a lot of that reverb, because it's going to sound super like flushed out and, you know, atmospheric. If you've got other elements and synth basses and stuff playing as well, it's going to muddy up your mix. So just cutting out a lot of those lows up to almost 600 hertz, especially on such a big mix, and then doing the same thing with the delay. You can see here I've got the low cut from 100, which isn't that high, but then I've brought in the EQ and that I've cut out up to like 150, and then another EQ where I'm also cutting up to about 150 hertz. So really just trying to avoid muddying up that low end, ducking some of those harsher frequencies. And this was the pattern that I played. It's super simple. So yeah, it's a pattern that really just kind of crescendos and builds, and it gives you that triumphant feeling, and then it just like goes back down, which is such a nice transition into the next section, which I'm about to play for you. One thing I do want to note is that I always do this on almost anything I play in. It's just not having the notes quantized exactly to the grid, so it just gives you more of a human feel and a realistic element. So yeah, I bounced that synth out, and then I just added some multi-band compression, doing the same as before, ducking where other elements are and just boosting slightly where the other elements weren't as much, and it just sounded good to me. So now here's the transition into the next section where this sample gets a lot more ambient and sets a whole new tone. Check this out. So you see after that big crescendo section with the synth, it now just brings in a whole kind of element of silence or quiet that just sets a whole new tone for the sample. So now this was just a shorter sounding synth bass, and this was the Live from Manhattan preset from Kavi's Mini Stash Volume 2 Analog Lab Bank, and I just added some FabFilter Saturn just for some compression, and this was the pattern that I played. Super simple. None of the notes are perfectly quantized. They're always slightly off the grid, as you can see here, even with when the notes stop, so it just sounds a lot more realistic, and it's quite a realistic sounding bass as well, so I really like this preset. And then I just had this cassette sound. So again, just some of that background texture. All I did was pitch it a little bit, added some RC20 for more vintage, vinyl-y kind of crackles, and just some panning as well. And then I took this pedal texture, which I reversed. This is what it sounds like, not reversed and without any of the plugins. It's just a nice little piece of ear candy. And then what I did was I pitched it to match, and then added the fourth shape pan preset in Portal just to give it a chopped feel. And then I added halftime with a lot of mix and then some delay, and I reversed it so it sounded like this. So just a nice subtle texture. You could hear how it kind of chopped. That was from the Portal preset. And then this is just the same kind of vinyl crackle texture from before. So I really like this section because I've never really had a sample just have the bass pretty much. And all I did was just add that kind of background texture to fill out some of the high end so that, you know, if it only was the bass, it would be like it kind of would have worked, but just adding those textures, this is what you get. Like just having that texture makes it feel so intimate and like you're in the same room as the person or thing playing this instrument. So I just love that so much. And then this is that same kind of ball dropping sound, which I just reversed. So, and that was just this one, if you remember. So yeah, all I did was reverse it. And then just that drum fill into the next section, which I'm going to play for you now. And this is just a really nice finish to the sample. Listen to this. So that's just the same chords as earlier. The same little crackle textures. And then synth bass. And there's only really like 2 new instruments that have been added, and the first one is this haunting kind of sample texture from Phantom 808, and I just chopped it up and it sounds like this. Just crazy. And I love sounds like that because it's just not something you'd really expect, or I don't know, it doesn't seem like an obvious element to add to your sample, but I want to be more experimental and use sounds like this. So this is pretty much what it sounded like originally. So really random sound, but I don't even know what to use to make that, to be honest. And all I did was added some compression, and then I added the FabFilter Saturn using this American Plexi amp, which is essentially just a distorted guitar amp, so it gives it this texture. So I just cut that up and put it on different layers because you'll see the next one here, I included some EQ and RC20 with quite a lot of noise on this. And then the last layer where I'd just taken one of the chops was here with the delay, so it just sounded like this. So I just wanted to create some separation in that one texture by chopping it, putting it on separate tracks and just EQing one different to the other. And then like this last one, adding some delay just so it rings out. Again, using that delay when it's really spacey and there is a lot of space to be used. So again, just using these pedal textures, which here was reversed into not reversed. Super nice. Now the last layer was using that same pad preset that I used for the chords, and initially I was just trying to come up with a melody, and I had this. So with everything it was like this. So I knew that that pad sound suited really nicely. The texture, the timbre, it suited the sample very well because I mean it was the same sound I used for the chords, but I didn't really like that melody. So when in doubt, reverse. I'm telling you, so many times I get away with using melodies that aren't great just by chopping them up and reversing them, and I get really cool textures like this. So this is what came out of it. And then the final layer was just this texture that I had time stretched, and this was also from the ANIMUS bank, and without any of the plugins it sounds like this. So it's basically just an ARP, and I time stretched it. And if you remember, I actually took a chop from this texture earlier in the sample as that transition, remember? So that was just a chop from this texture, and I just sound shifted it up to suit the key. Then some of the UAD compressor, added some of the spectral gate, again just to make it subtle. And then added some of the Pultec EQ, just cutting out a lot of the lows. And then just the FabFilter EQ, also ducking and cutting out a lot of the frequencies. And then just a very sort of jagged pan, so but yeah, that was a breakdown of my sample time frame, and I really enjoy making this kind of atmospheric, ambient, textured sort of thing. And if you want to see more stuff like this, or you have any video suggestions or tutorials that you want to see me make, comment them down below. And if you want to purchase or check out any of my sample packs, I have them all on my website, blueinfinity.store. You can also check out my Instagram or shoot me an email down below in the description. Until then, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.